Hurry, hurry! Episode 45 of Off the Rails podcast is about to begin. Our host, the offrailgamer, is here. There are a few seats down the front still. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone else tuning in to this, our 45th episode of Off the Rails podcast. Don't worry if you're new around here, I hope you'll be made to feel welcome. And if by some chance you like what you hear, you can find every previous episode to peruse and listen to at your leisure. The podcast goes out every other Thursday, except this one time when I missed an upload, and posted episodes 2 weeks in a row to make up for it. Anyway, you can listen on Spotify, Amazon Music, YouTube and Castbox. I start every show with a little bit of admin, but I do try to keep it brief so we can jump into the meatier part of the show. But what's this even all about, you may be asking? Well, I do try to keep the podcast on the subject of video games or video game adjacent topics anyway. Now, for the dull bit then, which I will try to keep under a minute. All there really is to say is, if you cast your eyes over the podcast episode description, you'll find links to all my social media accounts. TikTok, Twitch, YouTube and X, which gets very little use, I just haven't got round to deleting it yet. You'll also spy my email address, offrailgamer@gmail.com, which you can write to with any comments, queries, suggestions, feedback or anecdotes. If you keep your message clean and aren't at all mean, I have a segment called Listeners' Whispers in which I just might read out your email and respond. Now, that is the introduction pretty much complete, only I've rather run away with myself and have forgotten one thing that I must say to you. Happy New Year, and I certainly hope it's a good one. With that said, we can at last push on to the first part of the show proper, and I want to introduce a new segment for the new year. I call this my Retro Marcade, for reasons that may make sense to you, or may make no sense to you. And I'm not going to explain myself either. Instead, I'm going to get straight into it. Oh, it's a bit noisy in here, isn't it? Well, I'll try and make myself heard over all the hustle and bustle. This is my Retro Marcade, and the part of the show that I want to dedicate to a different retro arcade game each week. I'll essentially give a little description of the game, talk a bit about its history, share my experiences with it, and give my overall impression. Today's game is a classic released in November 1979, which is rather a long time ago now. Released by Atari, the game resulted from the work of two developers, Lyle Raines and Ed Logg. Launching first in arcades, it was ported to the Atari 2600 and Atari 8-bit in 1981, and later on the Atari 7800 in 1986. Logg and Raines decided to develop a game for hardware previously used for Lunar Lander and based it on an unfinished game called Cosmos. It was one of the first major hits of the golden age of arcade games, selling 47,840 upright cabinets. The home console releases on systems including the Atari VCS and 7800 sold more than 3 million copies through the 1980s. Now, unless you really know your stuff, I doubt you've guessed the game I'm showcasing this week. We're opening the Retro Marcade with a look at the game Asteroids. In Asteroids, you pilot a little triangle around the screen. All around you are, as the game's title tells us, asteroids floating around. They are all of different sizes, but you want to make sure none of them hit your little triangle, else you'll lose a life. An in-game life, that is. Your task is to maneuver around the screen avoiding collisions with the space rocks while shooting them to blow them up. breaking them down into ever smaller chunks until they are finally all completely obliterated. Clear the screen to advance to the next level and see how far you can get to try and reach the top of the high score leaderboard. But don't get too cavalier. Each level throws more asteroids at you and has them move around the screen at increasing speeds as well. I first played asteroids on the computers at secondary school. It was one of a handful of games including Minesweeper and that boat game where you have to take a wolf, a sheep and a cabbage across a river. Asteroids was always my game of choice, personally. Later on, and I believe I've talked about this previously, we got an Atari plug-and-play joystick to play on the TV at home. Now, on this joystick at the time, I believe my preferred game was Breakout, but I'll almost certainly talk about that in a future episode. Nonetheless, I was still very happy to be able to play Asteroids at home as well, and as I always say is the joy with old Atari games, it was fun taking turns playing and competing with my family to see who could achieve the highest score in these arcade classics. So, what's my honest opinion about this game? Well, I don't know what sort of appeal it would have to younger generations of gamers today who just want to play Fortnite or Roblox, but genuinely, I've always enjoyed a good game of Asteroids. It's simplistic in nature, and the graphics require a little imagination on the part of the player. Red Dead Redemption 2 it is not, but the game itself is 45 years old now, so you should keep that in mind. You might not lose a whole afternoon to Asteroids. As with so many of these old games, I'd be surprised if you went more than 10 or 15 minutes without seeing the game over screen, especially if you're playing with the proper joystick controller, many of which can be a bit stiff and difficult to control with any great accuracy as a result. But for what it is, I really like Asteroids. Now that is speaking as an Atari enthusiast, but honestly I would recommend it as a game, especially as something to pass and play with friends, taking turns in a bit of amicable competition. Which I think is probably enough said for our first retro marcade, so I'll cue up the music indicating the segment What I've Been Playing Recently while I lock up here. I'll catch you in a mo, and we'll fill you in on the games that I've been playing recently. You probably got that from the segment title. I've been really looking forward to this segment this week because I have a couple of things I want to talk about that I find really exciting, and perhaps I can convey my excitement to you, so I'll start with a story spanning half of the year that was. For my birthday, I got some new games for my Atari 2600 Plus, and when I say new games, I really mean it, as they were new and homebrew games that I got from AtariAge.com. These included 2 Christmassy compilations on cartridges titled Stella's Stocking and The Bite Before Christmas. I also got a game called Night Guy in Low Res World. And the only cartridge that would load and play was a homebrew game called Go Fish, which isn't based on the playing card game, but rather sees you play as a fish, snacking on smaller fish to grow larger and larger, all the while avoiding bigger fish. There's always a bigger fish. And electric eels. You can imagine my disappointment that 3 out of the 4 games I'd acquired weren't loading, but I held on to them, certain that I would get them working. Until that day, I stored them with my copy of Tutankhamun, which wasn't loading either. I thought that one may have been due to the game's age, as it had been a second-hand purchase and is turning 43 years old this year. Right, so to tell the story properly, I need to make a brief aside here. In November, I got hold of the original Tomb Raider trilogy for the Evercade. Initially, the cartridge wouldn't load, but a Google search pointed me in the direction of a console firmware upgrade, which sure enough did the trick. Anyway, it didn't click right away, but come December, I finally thought to check if there was a firmware update for the Atari 2600 Plus, which there was. And guess what? Stella's Stocking works. The Bite Before Christmas works. And Night Guy in Low Res World works. Unfortunately, Tutankhamun... No, I'm just kidding. Tutankhamun works as well. So, to cut to the point of the story, I've been playing these games at long last, and it's got me very eagerly looking forward to Atari April again. The other game I'm really excited to talk about is Game of the Year 2024. If you don't follow the Game Awards, it's a PlayStation exclusive, or PS5 exclusive specifically, and the game is Astrobot. For anyone who doesn't have a PS5, I can only say I'm sorry, because in my opinion this was very deserving of winning Game of the Year. It really makes the most of the DualSense controller's capabilities. I should think there are many people who might write off Astrobot without playing it first. It is, after all, a very cutesy platformer celebrating the history of PlayStation, but that's the pure joy of this game from an adult's perspective, as the appearances of beloved characters from games we grew up with, right up to games we're playing today. For example, you'll find references to Ape Escape, Snake and Psycho Mantis from the PS1 Metal Gear Solid games, Kazuya and Devil Kazuya from Tekken 2, and Kratos and Atreus from the latest God of War and God of War Ragnarok games. Beyond which, Astrobot poses quite the challenge in some levels, particularly the Lost Worlds for each of the X, Square, Circle and Triangle buttons. These are short levels that really put your skills to the test, as one wrong move will mean you have to start over and go again. Anyway, I'm about a third of the way through the game, at least at the time of writing this part of the script, but I am having an absolute blast with it, fully exploring all the levels to try and find all the secrets, and, on some of the harder levels, being rewarded with a real sense of achievement when I rise to the challenge. Without giving too much away, you're sent to, I think, 5 different solar systems, each with 6 planets to visit. Each planet is a level to complete. At the end of each solar system, you unlock a boss level. Then it's on to the next one. There's a little more to it than that, but to explain it would require giving away storyline details, and I really don't want to spoil anything for anyone who may be considering playing, but hasn't got to it yet. I've been jumping back into Cities Skylines here and there. This is definitely a comfort game for me. It's something super chill to pop on when I just want to wind down and relax. I will say though, I'm still hoping for a console release of Cities Skylines 2 one day, because I still don't own a machine capable of running it. And talking of cozy games, a few weeks ago I picked up a humble bundle of Steam games and have been playing a bit of LEGO Pirates of the Caribbean on my Legion Go. If you've played any of the LEGO games, you'll know exactly what you're getting, the usual LEGO games humour. Of course, you do get to play through the storylines of the films though. I played through The Curse of the Black Pearl in one sitting. That's the first film, by the way, and by far the best of them. It was really good fun, although it did take a good bit of trial and error to work out what I needed to do to defeat the final boss, Barbossa, and I'm not entirely sure I figured it out, more than just fluking it through perseverance. I'm enjoying playing LEGO Pirates of the Caribbean and have made a start on the second game, having escaped the cannibalistic tribe from the opening sequence and gotten as far as finding Tia Dalma at Tortuga. Davy Jones hasn't turned up yet though, so you can tell I've still got a fair ways to go. Over on YouTube, I did a post-Christmas stream and had a look at a game called Arcade Games Zone. It puts you into an arcade where you can play games like air hockey, darts, bowling. There's even a giant Scale-X trick you can play, or that game where you throw balls at different targets worth different points. Beyond that, there are a number of arcade cabinets you can play as well. These include games like Frogger, Tetris, and some of our favourite Atari classics like Space Invaders, Galaxian, Pole Position and such. As you can imagine, I really enjoyed this game, playing some of my favourites, but with improved graphics. Some of the games are effectively duplicated and given different titles, but this was true back in the day with games like Galaga and Galaxian, which also played very similarly to Space Invaders, Phoenix and Centipede. I commented as much while I was streaming, and you can watch the VOD from this under Lives on my YouTube channel. Also on YouTube, I played a game that I talked about in the last podcast, which also answered the question as to whether I'd get the Donkey Kong Country Returns remake on the Switch, or if I'd do what I did and pick up a second-hand copy of the original game on the Wii. You can always go and watch the video to see how I got on with it, so I'll wrap up this segment now and get into something a little different. We haven't done one of these in a while, so I figured we could look at the gaming releases on this day, 9th of January, throughout the years. And to start with, I'm going to take you all back a full 28 years to 1997, when Intelligent Cube released on PlayStation in the UK, also known as Crushi. I haven't had the pleasure of playing this game yet, but from what I understand, you place a marker on the ground as a series of blocks roll towards you. You want to place the marker where the green blocks are going to land in order to clear them. Clear them all to clear the stage and move on to the next level. Just don't get run over by the rolling blocks and don't let them reach the end of the platform. I have added Crushi to my game library as it was free with my PS Plus subscription, so I think it's one we'll have a look at on YouTube at some point this year. 1 year later, while we were all waiting for the France 98 World Cup to start, PlayStation dropped Bomberman World in the UK on 9th of January 1998. It allowed two-player action, which I imagine would have pitted you against your friend. Otherwise, I'm sure this game likely delivered the usual Bomberman gameplay we all love. As you can probably tell, it's another game I've never yet played. Other than that, 9th of January seems to have been pretty quiet on the game releases side of things. Kind of makes sense, as a lot of the bigger games tend to drop in time for Christmas, often leaving us with a quieter month at the start of the year. And that being true this year, I couldn't find any gaming news of any note either. I do have a lovely communication from one of my Organauts though, so let's hop over to Listener's Whispers. Good afternoon, or good whatever time of day you read this. I sent it in the afternoon, so I believe it was correct for me to have said that. I hope you had a lovely time over the Christmas break, whether you celebrate or not. Did you get time off work? You'll have filled us in on what you'd been playing, so I shan't ask. Don't think that's me being rude, I just figured you'd have already told us. Anyway, I don't think this message has got off to the best start, so I'll try and get straight to the point, or points even. Going back to the episode you did on movie tie-in games, I was surprised you made no mention of the notorious E.T., and that also got me wondering if you'd come across the Bill and Ted game as well. Another famously bad movie tie-in was Catwoman, right? I don't mean to just throw stinkers at you, but I think it'd be fun if you played some of these on the channel one day. As for upcoming games, I can't believe you didn't include GTA 6, especially as you'd made space in your list for that weird-sounding dating sim. GTA has to be my most hotly anticipated game release, as I'm sure it will be for many gamers, right? Saying that, I am also looking forward to Assassin's Creed, Doom and Fable. Well, I've probably kept you long enough for now. Love the show, Donkey. A lovely message from Donkey the Moose in South Shields. It's nice to hear from you again, and thank you for keeping your message clean and not mean. I did take some time off between Christmas and New Year's and kept it pretty chill. I hope you had a pleasant holiday season also. I do have the Catwoman movie tie-in game you spoke of, though I haven't myself played through that one yet. I will think about getting it up on the channel at some point, as you asked so nicely. Thankfully, I don't own Bill and Ted or E.T., the game that was, perhaps undeservedly, well, it's been blamed by many for the video game crash in the 1980s. I think the problems were probably greater than one game, but I still don't feel inclined to be rushing to play it anytime soon. I was thinking of GTA 6 as an upcoming game, but for some reason I had it in my head that it wasn't due to release until 2026. I see that it is currently set to drop this year, but I'll believe it when it happens. I'm fully expecting the release date to slide a couple of times, like we saw with Red Dead Redemption 2. But I prefer to get a top quality game, rather than the bugfest that haunted the release of Cyberpunk 2077. Anyway, we can live in hope, as I'm just as excited for the new GTA as anyone else. Now my Organauts at home. If you'd like me to read a message of yours in the next Listener's Whispers, there's just 3 things you need to do. 1. Send an email to offrailgamer@gmail.com. 2. Keep it clean. And 3. don't be mean. And with that, it's finally time we got on with the main part of the show. Okay then, today I want to continue my story of gaming through the years, and there have now been a fair few years to cover. I remember last time out I spoke about really becoming a gamer with the Sony PS1, a topic I'd already covered in another episode prior, so this time I've been really careful to make sure we're not covering the same old ground for a third time. Today then, we will look at the console that took me through my teenage years and into my early adulthood. The PS2 released November 2000 in the UK, and I think I got mine a little over a year later for Christmas 2001. It was possibly 2002? Either way, it was a long time ago. I was still a wee young sapling of 11 or 12 years of age. I'm fairly certain the first game I played on the system was Time Splitters. I remember the first level sends you to ancient Egypt armed with a blunderbuss, a single-shot weapon that felt cumbersome to wield against the hordes of mummies you encounter in your descent through a tomb to retrieve an artifact, which, once collected, you must return to the surface with, exiting the tomb to complete the level and move on. It was a great start to the game though, especially since the Brendan Fraser mummy films were pretty big deals at around that time, and I counted myself as a fan of them. The second level is set in a restaurant in 1970s China, and effectively has you infiltrate what is a gang hideout as a cop, to fetch files that I assume will be used to bring said gang to justice. It was pretty thrilling stuff again, and being a fan of Bruce Lee's Enter the Dragon as a kid, I remember loving the general aesthetic of this level. I won't run through the whole game, but I will say that Time Splitters offered so much, including a multiplayer campaign that delivered extra levels in addition to those of the solo campaign. I'm pretty sure at least. And I think I've spoken in a previous episode about one of my friends and I competing in the team deathmatch mode and giving poor old Mr. Big a particularly hard time. It's a fantastically fun game, and reminiscing about it now sure is making me want to load it up again. Only because it's another game that I got for Christmas, albeit a couple of years later, the next game I want to talk about now is The Simpsons Hit and Run, and it's fair to say this game has received a bit of a resurgence online in the last couple of years, and it's no surprise that it's so popular, as it's effectively Simpsons does GTA, and was really well put together. Throughout the game you play as Homer, Marge, Bart, Lisa, Apu, a little selection of different characters from the show. It's not like in GTA 5 where you can switch between characters at a whim. Each level puts you in the shoes of a new character and plays out in a different part of Springfield. And the game pays real service to the show, featuring all your favourite characters from Principal Skinner and Edna Krabappel to Mo Sislak, Cletus, Chief Wiggum, and of course Mr. Burns and Smithers as NPCs to encounter in the open world, and in the story missions. There are also jokes from the show, and unlockable costumes and vehicles you'll recognise too, like Homer's Mr. Plow outfit and Snowplow. I pretty much disappeared into my room for the day when I got Simpsons Hit and Run. Some missions are infuriatingly challenging, but on the whole the characters handle pretty well from memory, and the game delivered a pretty addictive experience. Should we get a bit darker now? That way we can try and pick ourselves back up again before the end of the episode. Now, this is the game that pretty much always springs to my mind whenever I think of the PS2. I've talked about Max Payne once before, but honestly I think it's one of the greatest games of the PS2 era. Gosh though, it opens with New York cop Max Payne returning home from work to his idyllic family life in the suburbs, the real American dream. But it's about to turn into the worst nightmare possible as Max walks in to find a group of home invaders who have just murdered his wife and newborn baby. Okay, that's a really heavy start to a game, but let's talk about what makes this one great. Instead of cutscenes, the story is told through a series of graphic novel panels with a noir detective voiceover in Max's gruff voice. It really creates a unique presentation and sets a dark atmosphere and tone to the game. Furthermore, when you enter a room full of bad guys, you can slow down time and dive through a hail of bullets, returning fire in something that feels very much like bullet time from the Matrix films. And for context, let's remember how huge those films were at the time, so it felt honestly fantastic having a go at recreating some of those set pieces for yourself. As I say, I can't think of the PS2 without my mind immediately returning to Max Payne. I hated the nightmare sequences in which you had to tightrope walk on thin trails of blood, but otherwise this game is an absolute must-play in my opinion. Keeping on a bit of a theme, let's continue policing the streets of New York in true crime New York City. I borrowed this game off a mate, and don't remember too much about it beyond having a killer time with it. You start out as a patrol cop, and I think you can be busted back down to uniform if you mess up too much. Before long though, you're afforded the opportunity to go plainclothes. The feature I liked most about this game was having the option to play as a good cop, making stops based on intelligence received over the radio and arrests when you find individuals carrying contraband, or else you can play realistically, harassing people and planting evidence to boost your stats. It's a good game, and one that I've been able to add to my collection at some point in the last year or two, but beyond checking that the disc works, I'm yet to go back to true crime. Perhaps one for the YouTubes at some point. Staying in the Big Apple, that's New York, right? We now turn our attention to the other side of the law in The Godfather. As a teen, I loved all things mafia, with some of my favourite films including Goodfellas and Scarface. Okay, not exactly a mafia. Gangster, I maybe should have said. I was super excited when I saw we were getting a video game adaptation of The Godfather, because I'd not long read the book and seen the film for the first time. I got the game for my 16th birthday, and it was fortunate timing because I'd finished my GCSEs and had a long summer break ahead of me. I adored this game and lost almost all of my free time to it that summer between shifts working at a well-known supermarket retailer. I loved how you could grab hold of business owners that you were trying to extort protection money from and put them through their shopfront windows or throw bakers into their ovens if they resisted your persuasive techniques. I started replaying The Godfather, off-channel, last year, and I honestly think it still holds up. Sure, it doesn't compare graphically to games like Red Dead Redemption 2, but it doesn't look at all bad in my opinion. And it handles well enough too. It's as much fun to play today as it was almost 19 years ago when it first released. Without meaning to spoil anything, you play as an unknown individual who, having seen their father gunned down by one of the other families when you were a child, joined the Corleone family as an adult. You get to play all the key moments from the book and the film, guarding Don Vito Corleone in hospital, travelling to Hollywood to make a casting director an offer he can't refuse. The game has you do it all. 2 years earlier, I gave up my summer to a quite different game altogether in Age of Empires 2, The Age of Kings. I'm pretty sure I've told the story before of how I found this game in-game. I hadn't really known what I'd gone in looking for, but when I spotted AOE 2 on PS2, I couldn't wait to get home and have a play. I would always play sandbox mode, which allows you to take your chosen civilization out of the Dark Ages through to the later medieval or imperial era, as the game calls it, and the start of the Industrial Revolution. You must research new technologies such as agriculture, mining, currency, and military upgrades to advance your society. These upgrades cost resources though, so you'll want to have some villagers mining stone while others mine gold or silver. You'll set some to chop wood and others to hunt or grow crops. There are relics in the world for you to collect. These require a monk to carry them and must be stored in your abbey. And by the way, you don't want to ignore these, as it will spell defeat if your opponents collect them all, and you have none. You can win by collecting all the relics, military victory, or by constructing a wonder and having it stand for 1,000 in-game years. Luckily the years pass pretty quick, so this equates to something like 10 minutes. You will want your army to defend your wonder though, as enemy units will try to demolish it otherwise. I'll be honest, I wasn't a fan of the remake this game got. I don't know why they did it, but they messed with the game mechanics and made it almost unplayable. Saying that, it in no way detracts from the memories I have with the PS2 version. Hence, it made it into today's lecture. A big game on the PS2 that I think largely gets overlooked by gamers in favour of the N64's GoldenEye is 007 Nightfire, and it might surprise you that I will speak highly of this game, given it's another first-person shooter, like Time Splitters, so that's 2 I'm bigging up this episode. But these 2 examples did it very well. Nightfire allows you to play as Pierce Brosnan's James Bond in a new original story. It kicks off really well, putting you first in the shoes of Dominique, a French intelligence agent armed with a sniper rifle, taking potshots at the bad guys' vehicles from a helicopter as they engage in a high-speed car chase with Bond on the streets of Paris. The second part of the mission seats you in Bond's Aston Martin, chasing down a cargo truck armed with an explosive. Your car is equipped with some of our favourite gadgets, including smoke screens, machine gun headlights, and finally, you fire a concentrated EMP at the cargo truck to cut out its electronics and bring it to a stop, while simultaneously disarming the bomb. And you do all that just in time to see in the new year with Dominique and a perfect view of the Eiffel Tower. But the next mission really starts to make you feel like Bond as you sneak around a castle grounds to gatecrash a party to gather intel on what the game's supervillain is planning. As you go, you need to make sure you cut power to the searchlights and alarms so you can stealth your way around the courtyards undetected. I won't run through the entire storyline, but the missions were varied and really delivered the secret agent experience, and the local multiplayer was quite good fun as well. I wasn't immediately taken in by Worms Blast. I'd thought I was buying a 3D Worms game, but when I started it up, I found it was a bubble pop Tetris type puzzle game. I won't lie, I did feel a little disappointed at first, but it quickly grew on me, and I have to say, I don't regret having it in my collection. I'm going to finish up with a 2 for 1, as there are 2 games I can't help but think of in relation to the PS2, even though I didn't have the full games until much more recently. Nonetheless, my PS2 came with playable demos of Dark Cloud and Klonoa 2 Lunatea's Veil, and both demos offered enough to really capture me and had me longing to play the full games for more than 20 years before I finally picked them up. And that's just about all for this episode. I'm sorry it's gone up late, but I've had a really nasty bout of flu or fluvid this past week, which has had me pretty much bedridden. I'm hoping to resume ordinary scheduling from next week, so all that's left to say is thank you for listening, and I'll catch you next time. Bye!